Hi, this chapter, Chapter 7, has to do with the State Dental Practice Act and society. So we'll basically be covering in this chapter things that are going to be of vital interest to you after you graduate, and in particular, if you move state from state, state to state. We'll be going over different restrictions, different license requirements, different continuing education requirements versus state to state. And we'll be comparing what direct supervision, indirect supervision, and general supervision mean. And this particular, all the supervisions will be of direct interest to you throughout your career. So we'll recognize the responsibility of the hygienist in understanding and observing the state statutory and regulatory provisions. First, I want to go through some vocabulary that you can come back to. Enact or enactment means to make or write a bill of law. The legislature is who writes bills of law, and when it says bill of law, it was enacted, it means it was written or it was made at a particular time. Implement means to put something into effect. When you implement a law, it means you're actually putting it into effect. Biennially. Biennial means once every 2 years. Law refers to the entire body of statutory, which means laws that have codes on them. Administrative and common law provision and that regulate. A statute is a specific codified statement of some law that has been approved by the legislative body of government or written by them. Common law means your case was based on prior court decisions. So we'll get into more of that later. And statutory law is, of course, like I said, made by the legislature. So what is the state's authority? They're responsible to protect the health and safety and welfare of the citizens. So dental hygiene is governed under this authority. We're governed under our state authority. Authority described in each state's constitution is where you can find it. And there's 3 branches of state authority. You have, just like in the federal government, in the state, you have the same thing. You have legislative, executive, and judiciary. You'll need to know this. The legislative is who enacts or writes the laws or coded laws, which are statutes. You have the executive branch that implements. They actually put the law that the legislator wrote into action, and then they enforce it. So they put it into action and enforce. Judiciary is the final arbiter. And an arbiter is someone who decides something. So a law may be questioned, and then the judiciary branch goes in and decides, who's right and who's wrong in a case. So they decide. Statutory law, let's go into that. That's the legislative branch enacts the Dental Practice Act. So they write the Dental Practice Act. They write the laws. It could be a single law or many laws, compilation of laws. And we need to be familiar with the laws that deal specifically with dental hygiene, as well as general laws that protect the citizens of the state, that protect their well-being. An example, most states have enacted laws requiring healthcare professionals to report suspected child abuse. But most of our laws, of course, are found in the Dental Practice Act, but this particular one may not be found in the Dental Practice Act. This law may be found in acts that focus on child protection rather than the practice of dental hygiene. So although we can get most of our laws, if we look at Missouri Dental Practice Act or Kansas Dental Practice Act, there are some laws that are not put in there. You have to go to into the Constitution of that state and look under suspected child abuse. And then that law would be there, because it's not only for dental hygiene, it would be for other health industry workers. So sometimes you have to look around to find the answer to certain questions. So regulations, and let me go back to that. I believe a question that might be answered on or asked on midterm or quizzes or finals boards is that your state Dental Practice Act has all the answers. You know, you can find everything that you need to know in the State Dental Practice Act, and that would be false, because you have to sometimes look in other places. So the issues on regulations that may be regulated may not be included in the State Dental Practice Act. So on page 66, you can see a list. These are a list of things that may not be in your particular state. Abuse reporting requirements, biomedical waste and hazard management may not be in your state. They could be, or they most likely will not be. Business operation practices, consent to treatment and informed consent, criminal activity, disability accommodations, education and training requirements. A lot of states will include education in their Dental Practice Act. But if you can't find anything in a particular state, then you need to look elsewhere in the state constitution. So false healthcare claims, liability for volunteer services, malpractice or actions resulting from healthcare injuries, mandatory malpractice insurance, patient confidentiality and heightened protections regarding that, and public health reporting requirements. All of those might possibly be in different sections of the Constitution that you would have to look up individually. So the statutory law, the state coded laws, regulate the practice of dental hygiene. And a coded law would be something that says law point, 00.41-D law regarding licensure requirements. All right, so they have this code prior to the actual statement of the law, and that's statutory law. So licensure requirements, examination requirements, licensure eligibility requirements, licensure by endorsement. You can get a license by endorsement moving state to state, and we'll go into that. Approval of certain educational programs, examination and disciplinary authority, your scope of practice for a hygienist and a dentist, etc., and an assistant, supervision requirements, which would include those indirect, direct, and general, and your continuing education requirements are all regulated in the practice of dental hygiene under statutory law. So rules and regulation, the executive branch, as we said, implements and regulates these laws that were put together by the legislature. A typical executive branch includes the department and agency of state government, such as it might, in your particular state, these might be under the Department of Health. It could be Department of Professional Regulation, Department of Consumer and Industry Services, or Secretary of State. So it could be listed under any of those. Luckily, with the help of the internet and search bars, you can usually find the answer that you want, and then it will just show you what department or agency of the executive branch that it might be in that implements and regulates these. So more specific requirements accomplished through quote-unquote rulemaking a public process providing input from anyone. The regulation of the practice of hygiene may be facilitated or helped by an appointed board in your state, such as Colorado does this, or an elected body, regulatory body. North Carolina says that in their state, the regulation may be helped by this regulatory body that needs to be elected. So they have to hold elections to be on this board. And in Colorado, it's appointed usually by the governor or some authority figure. So the regulatory board may be referred to as a board of dental examiners, board of dentistry, your state dental board, which in Missouri and Kansas is what it's under, the state dental board, state dental commission, dental quality assurance commission, or board of dental health care. Dental hygiene representation is very common, functions to examine licensure, investigate disciplinary action, and adopt new rules and regulations. So in some states, the regulatory body may be advised by a whole nother secondary body, which has a greater dental hygiene representation. So most often on these, which we'll get into, on these boards, they'll have at least one hygienist. Okay, they may have one hygienist, 3 dentists. They usually have a layperson who is not biased in either direction be on these boards to examine what is right and wrong. But in some states, they will have a secondary body that has maybe 2 or 3 hygienists. And someone who does this, the states who do this, is as a council or a dental hygiene committee, and they do those in the states of Florida and New Mexico. So the United States dental hygiene is regulated by each state. It is not regulated nationally, in case there's a question about that. We do not have a federal regulation. It's not under the whole nation. It is under each individual state. So the responsibility of the professional to review the laws and regulations is where it lies. No one's going to come, if you say, I didn't know, they're going to say, why didn't you look up? You're an adult and you're a professional. It is your responsibility as a professional to review the laws and regulations and find out where these things are. So to contact for state licensing agency, I found a site called www.dentalboards.org. And so if you click on that and click services and then practice acts, it will show you, it'll have a list of all the states, and you click on that and it goes into their practice act. Now, some of these, I don't know how much these are updated, but if you can't find what you need in this particular thing, then go in, try to find it through another avenue. But students have had a lot of good luck going right into the dentalboards.org and finding the state that they want to look up, and then clicking on it, which will hopefully bring up the Dental Practice Act. So they say a good time to review these practice acts because they're ongoing. Things can change, and definitely with this COVID, some things are going to have probably changed in the practice of hygiene. So a good license renewal is a good time. You can do that biennially, which is once every 2 years. You could look at that. Or if a lot of changes are going on, if you run through a time this and then later on in your career, you might want to look at it like around your birthday, and just know that around your birthday each year that you are going to, sometime in that 2 to 4 week area, you are going to look up and just quickly review if anything has changed or upgraded. So you could pick some other day of significance. So licensed by each state that you're practicing in. So I have a license in Missouri and Kansas, so I could practice in either state. And you can have as many licenses in as many states as you want and hold them all concurrently. It's just that every time that you renew your license, you have to pay for the license. So I pay to have my license in Missouri and pay for Kansas, both every 2 years to be able to maintain my license. And each state could um, could go ahead and audit me to make sure that I have enough continuing ed. Luckily for us living here, Kansas and Missouri follow each other in most everything. There's a few things that Kansas has that Missouri does not have yet. So you need to be aware of that. As far as the continuing ed goes, both Kansas and Missouri require 30 hours of continuing education after you graduate, and it has to be done in a 2-year period. It's best to just divide that out and know that you need to take at least 15 a year. There's some states that you may move to later in your life that require X amount to be taken in each state. You can't take like all 30 the first year and nothing the second year. You could do that actually in Kansas and Missouri. But some states will not allow you to do that. Some states will say you can only have, 10 of your hours are the only hours that can come from online, like dental.coms, and that your other CEs have to be through all day seminars that you attend. So with this COVID thing going on, some of that may change. So in some of the states, but so far Kansas and Missouri, you can take, all 25 in 1 year and 5 in the next year. You must be a graduate from an accredited dental hygiene program for licensure in dental hygiene through CODA. And you have to have successful completion of a national, regional, and state licensure exam. The state licensure exam is the law, jurisprudence, they call it. You take a jurisprudence exam right before you graduate, and you can take them in Missouri and Kansas. You can take both of them. They're very similar. The exception would be Alabama. Like Alabama is a state, and this is in actually review books. It's so rare, and probably it's going to be on your quizzes or midterm finals. So the exception to this rule is Alabama. All you have to do in Alabama is you can go one of two ways. Either way is fine. You can be a graduate of a board-approved school of dental hygiene, or in lieu of this, or in place of this, you could have dental assisting experience and be a dental hygiene trainee for 12 months to get board approved to be a hygienist. How about that? Okay, so that's kind of scary as far as all the things that you've learned even so far, to know that you can have dental assisting experience, which is great. But as you know, the assistants, that we delve a little bit deeper than an assistant would need to delve. But in this particular state, they could just be in the office and work as a trainee for 12 months, and then they could be board approved if they had dental assisting experience prior. So you have to think, what does that tell you about the state? It tells me that I don't think Alabama is very high paying for hygienists. And there's not many schools in the state of Alabama. So what it says to me is that there's a shortage of hygienists who in the state, or who want to stay in the state. And so they've had to allow this dental assisting experience so that they can at least have somebody approved to go subgingival. So don't know that to be a fact, but that's usually what drives this kind of a law. So it may be licensed on the basis of review of credentials. You can be licensed by endorsement or reciprocity. These two, you can be licensed if you've already been licensed in another state and then you move to, like, let's say you move to Iowa after you graduate and you've worked here for a while, and you or your family moves to Iowa. So there are certain stipulations that they will that you have to abide by, and that's different state to state. So you'd have to look up the Iowa State Dental Practice Act, try to find your answers. If you couldn't find your answers there, I probably would try to shortcut it and call the Iowa Dental Board and get some, tell them your situation and ask them different places you need to maybe look in their constitution to find rules and what can happen if you are moving into that area. So Colorado, North Dakota, Connecticut are 3 states where you can do each one of those. Some states do not allow you to move there and just be licensed on basis of a review of credentials and or endorsement or reciprocity. And what this means is some states, when you move there, you'll have to find a patient and take a clinical board. And in other states, they'll say you don't have to do that if you've been practicing. As long as you've been practicing your last year being in the year before you moved here, you don't have to be practicing. You just get together these credentials or get somebody to endorse you, and then it will be reciprocated, and we'll go ahead and let you have your license. So you've got to check that. A CODA accredited dental hygiene graduate, a licensed in good standing. Most of them want you to have experience, and they'll describe a minimum. Want you to have, you can get a license by means of reciprocity or credentials endorsement if you've had at least 3 years experience. Okay, and and in that 3 years, they would want you to maybe have those 3 years just prior to when you moved. And what that stops is people who, let's say that you went to work as a hygienist for 3 years, and then you stopped and had a baby and you stayed home for 3 years, and then your family moved and you wanted to get licensed in another state. Well, they want your experience to be not to have 3 years of no experience by the time they let you have a license. They'll want you to have your experience as close to maybe a year of experience, up to 2, up to 3, 5 I've seen, before they'll just hand you a license in their state because you have good standing and we're a CODA member and accredited CODA graduate, etc. So all of this could happen, and the examination may be waived if you can. Hygiene, hopefully we're hoping to, always hoping to change this. And since I graduated in the 70s, we have always wanted this to change. And because if your husband moves around or you move around, this career does not make it easy for you to obtain licenses in some states. But in my case, I had to move to, I moved to different parts of the whole country. It wasn't just a surrounding state. It was coast to coast type of thing, and they didn't make it easy. So hopefully you guys and your generation can improve that in the future. Licensure provisions, like for instance in Colorado, an applicant has it licensed in another state or territory. You have to have successful completion of the National Board Dental Education. So that's your national boards. Validated teaching or clinical practice at least 1 year during the 3 preceding years. So that's the kind of case that I was just previously talking about. So they would want you to have, like, if you practiced for 2 years or a year, and then you stayed out a year, and then you went back in a year, right, and then moved, then that would be a good thing, because it would be closest to the, they just want you to have at least one of those years during the 3 preceding years. So demonstration, they want you to demonstrate competency. Okay, so North Dakota, an applicant licensed in another state or territory, they would want you to have that, and actively practicing at least 3 years total. But they don't say, I think in here, actively practicing at least 3 years. I don't know that this necessarily, this goes on, this law, or if it stops here. In other words, it doesn't say anything about the years right before you moved. So you'd have to double check that. North Dakota have grounds for denial of an application that do not exist. So they are talking about there's no denial or any grounds for denial. Not quite sure what that means, because they do have these other rules, but the fee has been paid. You have had to pay the fees. You have to have certified board licensures to be able to duplicate and give to them. You've had to write the boards and have your scores sent to the dental board in North Dakota or wherever the place is they're having you take these. And you have to meet all the licensure requirements that they have in North Dakota. Connecticut, an applicant providing evidence of professional education. You've paid the fee for an application. No license shall be issued if an applicant has a pending disciplinary action or who is subject of an unresolved complaint from a prior state. So this is if you didn't get enough CEs and your case is pending, which you'd be under disciplinary action in your state that you're practicing, and then you want to move to Connecticut, they will not issue you a license if you have this and it's not done yet. Okay, or maybe you have an unresolved complaint. There was a complaint that was completely unresolved, and they have people that find these things out. It's not difficult at all. In fact, we'll be showing you how you can do that, like, super easily. So grounds for denial do not exist. Okay, provisional license, valid to date, approved. A provisional license is a temporary license. Let's say you just want to, sometimes when you move to a state, by the time that they can get everything gathered, if you have pretty much your ducks in a row, they will issue you a provisional license, which will say, all right, you can practice from this date to that date, and it would maybe a 2-month period, and you can practice in our state, but it's temporary. After that, you should, if everything is okay, you will be issued a license from the actual state. And if they find something where they don't issue you a license after that temporary and find that there were some things that they need to hold you back on, then you would not have any more license. So it's just valid till the date that's been approved by. So an applicant currently licensed in another jurisdiction, and those who don't have option of reciprocity. So maybe your state does not have reciprocity, and so you can't just say, well, I practiced X amount of years, I was in good standing, meaning that you paid your dues, you had your license, there were no complaints against you or pending issues with your continuing ed hours, that means you're in good standing. So just by the fact of that, and allowing you to waive an examination, some states don't have it. So they have these temporary license. But you still need to be in good standing. You have to have at least 2 years of experience. You a graduate of an accredited school of dental hygiene or dentistry. You need to have passed the national boards. Sponsored by a state licensed individual in good standing. So you could have your dentist sponsor you, or another hygienist sponsor you. You could have anyone in good standing who you would want to sponsor you and vouch for you. So granted to a reputable professional, you have to have a good reputation and good background, because they will check, meet all their requirements of that particular state, employed by a nonprofit corporation accepting Medicaid reimbursement, and it expires immediately when the applicant fails to meet the requirements. So if the requirements you failed to provide enough to your state to actually get your real license, and you supplied them with maybe X amount of things but didn't kind of drop the ball and didn't kind of finish it out, if you fail to meet all the rest, then of course your temporary license would immediately expire, and they would notify you of that. Volunteer license. This is granted to a licensed professional in good standing, must meet all the examination requirements that you would find under volunteering. Not failed the state clinical exam within 5 years. So the state clinical exam would be your clinical, patient exam, and you cannot have failed that within 5 years, and then you can volunteer. You have to have at least 5 years experience in the field, and license holder must practice per board directions. You can get a faculty license. A faculty license is granted to a licensed professional in good standing. You do not have to have a special examination, but you have an annual review and teaching and demonstrating only. Only you need to teach only at a named school, practice under general supervision of a licensed dentist with the institution named on your license. So we have a general supervision, means that a dentist needs to be on the floor, in the building and on the floor and then we can go ahead and practice. So like Dr. Thurlow. Okay, your license, and this is for everybody, has to be on display. Your license should always be on display in your office. That is why all of the faculty members have all of our license framed on the wall in front of Dr. Thurlow's office. So the license must be displayed, and when I was in private practice, it was displayed there. So renewal schedule is established by state law, and each state may be a little different. Renewal for a lapsed license varies from state to state. So let's say that you decided to, you thought, I'm not going to go back to work for at least 5 years, and I don't want to pay this licensure amount for the next 5 years when I know I'm not going to be practicing. So that's called you letting your license lapse. And in some cases, you have to go through quite a rigmarole to get it back. So I really would advise you strongly not to let your license lapse unless you are really ready to be out of the industry and you know that for sure. Practicing without a license is a criminal offense. It's a third-degree felony. So it is, you are in trouble and can get your license suspended or revoked with the dental side of things, but it is also a legal side of things, and it's criminal offense. So you could have a monetary fine of having to pay thousands of dollars and or imprisonment. So if you do not comply with that, and there you'll find out through looking at this that there are some people that do that. So you must comply with accepted standards of professional practice and conduct. Some states have a uniform standards and some don't. License suspension can be due to unprofessional conduct on your side, violation of the laws and regulations, clinical incompetence, substandard care. Now, if you're not complying with what you know to be right, you're giving substandard care, and you could have a license suspended for that. If you are in clinic and, I mean, on the clinical side with your patients, and you are giving, I mean, you're just a mess. You're just giving a lot of tissue trauma, and you're hurting the patients, and you're just incompetent. Taking x-rays, whether they need them or not, etc. You're completely ignoring the rules and infection control, etc. You are giving a substandard care, and you can have your license suspended or even revoked. Unprofessional conduct, what does that mean? So if you commit fraud, if you're misrepresentation or deception, this could be that you move to another state and you meet a friend who is a hygienist in an office, and you're waiting for your license to come, and they don't have maybe a temporary license for you to be able to practice. And let's say your friend is really, really sick and doesn't want to lose her job, and she says, can you go in and do the day for me? And so you say, no, I don't have my license. And the person's like, they'll never know. They never even check resumes, but it will get me off of the hook, etc. Okay, so if you decide to do that, it's obviously deception, lying, fraud, and misrepresent. You're representing yourself as a hygienist, in which you are clearly not in that state yet. I don't care if you've had 30 years experience in another state. In that state, you are not a registered dental hygienist by law. So that could be unprofessional conduct for sure. If you've been convicted of a felony, if you get convicted of aiding and abetting. So aiding and abetting could be that you know full well that the front desk, one of the front desk personnel are skimming money or doing something like that, stealing from the office, and you know and you don't do anything about it, then that's aiding and abetting. Or you could actually be helping them. Sexual conduct with a patient. We are not supposed to have sexual conduct. There's a line drawn. It is unethical to have sexual conduct or any sexual overtones with your patient. So what you do on your off hours is your business. But we don't do anything in the office. Violation of any state or federal law, of course, is unprofessional conduct. And mental incompetence, physical illness, or substance abuse of any kind is unprofessional, and you're still trying to go in there and practice, and it is unprofessional. So you can be seeing a therapist. That's not an issue. It's just if you really are mentally incompetent, you are coming in hungover every day, and you're not making good decisions to things, even, or on drugs or something. That's what mental incompetence is. So let's talk about continuing education. Most states have education requirements, and you have to have documentation of the CEs that you need. I have folders. Some people put them in binders, but those are pretty bulky after you have practiced for 20 years. There's a lot of binders that you need someplace to store. So I have folders, and I I have just loose folders that I will label 2 years at a time, 2019 and 2020. And then I put both of those folders in a larger green hanging folder that is labeled 2019 to 2020, because that's and personally for me, I need to redo my license at the end of this year. So it keeps everything in order. And every time that you take a CE, you need to have documentation of it. So that means the certificate is good enough. So you get a certificate and you just keep those, because one day you may be audited. There's a couple of faculty members and different people who get audited frequently, and I'm kind of thinking it might be a little bit like being on jury duty. It's like once they have your name, then you kind of can get recalled a lot of times, even though they swear that that's not the way they do it, but it seems to work out that that's kind of the way it is. And other people have not ever been asked. May have lived someplace 40 years and never been asked to be on a jury duty. So I don't know if it's like that or not, but if you're audited and you cannot provide them your CEs, then there's going to be trouble with that. So you can have your license, you will have your license suspended for however much time that your state decides it needs to be suspended over. So, and if it continued to keep happening, you probably would get your license revoked. So what the dental industry tries to do if you get caught is that they try to work with you. People are not perfect. So they try to uphold and have some kind of restitution process for the person, hopefully that they get their lives in order and that they can go on and then do the right thing. But then if they find that they're not, then they'll jerk the license. So you're going to find when we go through and find out some state laws of dental hygienists and dentists and what they've done, sometimes you go down to what the judgment was and it will say suspended for 5 years and $1,000 fine, or suspended for 2 years and $1,000 fine. And you want to go, oh my God, I can't believe that's all they got. And it's your profession's way of trying to work with you. They are not wanting to have the money and the knowledge, the mind, the help for society, and just discard that at first basis easily. They'll always want usually to give a person a chance to go through a rehab program or whatever it is, and they will support that. But if you come out and you just continue to keep doing whatever infraction it is, then they will. They're like, okay, we're done, and we'll revoke your license. So when we in Kansas and Missouri, and I don't know about other states, but in Kansas or Missouri, they can't deal with all the paperwork coming in from the thousands of dental professionals. And so they do not want you to send copies of your CEs with your license renewal. They just want you to, they ask you if you have them. You have to list what they are and the hours and who they were with, who sponsored the CE. You list that and show that you have that many. And then that's your documented and sign it. And so then you send that in and they keep that. But then it could be, I think they can audit up to like 7 years or something. So you could be thinking, oh, well, I didn't have as many this year, but I'll get them next year, etc. Or the next license renewal. And you could then forget about it. And if they come back in 6 years and just pull a name out of a hat and say, we're going to monitor or audit you today, and you don't have that, then that could be trouble there. So really make sure that you keep those in a good working file and that you can get your hands on them and that you have them at your finger, at your finger's notice. So, inactive status available in some states. Exception is Arkansas. Okay, so sometimes when you don't want to lose your license exactly and just forget about it and not pay it. But actually, if you know for sure that you may be out of the industry for 3 years, instead of just stopping your payments and not letting them know anything, then you could apply for an inactive status in some states and say, I will be inactive. And what they do is when you decide to come back, like in the third year and or fourth year, you decide that that's when you're going to start working again, then as long as you've kept up your CEs in those inactive years, then you'll just pay and you can go right back in and they will issue you another license. Where if you just drop off the map, then you may that's when it becomes, you can get it, but in most states, but it's difficult. So the exception would be Arkansas. Arkansas, if you stop working, you have to forfeit your license for 2 years when you stop working. Just really wild. Okay, so scope of practice. This is a test question that a lot of people miss. I don't know if they don't understand the word varies. It means it could be, it's different among different states. It varies. But the scope of practice varies among states. It is not the same in every state. So your educational, assessment, preventive, clinical, other therapeutic services could be different state to state. So expanded functions, they'll talk about expanded functions, and that can even differ state to state. The scope will vary, will be different, so your expanded functions may be different. So most states consider expanded functions of a dental hygienist to be your nitrous, your anesthesia license, so laser license, whatever that you put on after that would be expanded function of the normal dental hygiene things that have always been able to be done. So it requires expanded functions, requires approved instruction, formal endorsement, and heightened supervision. It can perform duties assigned to dental assistants. And I say this, and let me say that over again more emphatically. A dental hygienist can perform any duty that is assigned to a dental assistant. So I think that might be a test question. I've seen it in review books. So we can perform anything that they can perform. But personally, I want to say, should we? We can't, and I think it's more that maybe we could learn to perform anything that they can perform because they don't have to have a license to do anything. So we could be taught just as well as the assistants could be taught within time. So that's mainly what they're meaning. But if you have not performed a duty before that an assistant has performed, then it would be unethical just to go in and use a patient as a guinea pig. You have to be trained in that just like the assistant was trained to be able to go in. So preclusions. Preclusions means not allowed. What are the preclusions of your scope of dental practice? This will be either a quiz and or midterm and or final question, because this I see in almost every review book. So it could possibly be on boards. Preclusions mean not allowed. So what is not allowed in our scope of practice? We cannot diagnose. So we can dental hygiene diagnose. But when they talk just diagnosis, they're meaning from a dentist. Okay, so we cannot legally diagnose. If they have DH diagnosed, you can say yes to that, but that's the only way. So we cannot give a diagnosis. We cannot cut or remove hard or soft tissue. And we cannot prescribe drugs or medications. So in my office, they suggest that this isn't a great thing to do, but it's what my dentist did, is that he had a pad of for chlorhexidine, and he had prescriptions, and then I had his name, a stamp name, and if I felt that they needed to have a prescription for chlorhexidine and they had insurance, so they didn't want to buy it at our office, they maybe wanted to buy it through a certain pharmacy where they could get points and etc. Then I could just give that to them, okay? But that is the only thing. We don't give, and I'm not prescribing them, I'm just giving him what the dentist has already okayed. That would be an okay thing, but we cannot prescribe drugs or medications, or if your dentist says, oh, will you remove that little bit of that, we are not allowed to do that. So supervision, here we'll go through this varies state to state also. Direct supervision, you have to have had, this is supervision of what type of supervision does your dentist have to have over you, the procedures. So your dentist has to have direct supervision. It means that you, in order to do something like a hygienist is usually, an assistant is usually under direct supervision. They have to have had a prior diagnosis, needs to be from the dentist, and that already had to happen, and a dentist authorization. The dentist has to be on the premise, and they need to kind of go in and follow and look at the procedure that the assistant has done before, even if it's a 2-second look. Like very often, if they will be in the middle, the dentist does his procedure, then he may go into another room and leave the assistant to wrap a cord or retraction cord or kind of finish out the procedure of what she can do. So the dentist has to be there. The assistant cannot do those if the dentist is not in the office. So the dentist should go back in and take a real good, look-see and make sure that it was okay. They have to have a dental exam following the procedure. Okay, so that's direct. And that makes sense. You can remember that because they directly have to be involved. They don't necessarily have to be in the room looking over their shoulder, but they have to be involved and go back in and look and stay on the premise. Indirect supervision. Indirect supervision is you still need to have a prior diagnosis, a dentist's authorization, and a dentist needs to be on the premise. This usually has to do, indirect in general, usually have to do with the hygienist. So they can be he can be doing on his side of the office doing all of his restorations, and I can be on the hygiene side of the office, but the dentist needs to have given a diagnosis and authorization. He needs to be somewhere in the office, even if he is not looking at or okaying what the hygienist is doing. And what this entails is that under law, we are not allowed to see, at least in Kansas and Missouri, you're not allowed to see a new patient without the dentist in the office. We can clean and do x-rays on existing patients without the dentist being in the office. But we cannot give anesthesia, nitrous, or see a brand new patient for the first time. So once the dentist has seen their first appointment, that's what's okay. So you've made your dental hygiene diagnosis. The dentist has also seen this patient. They come back to you and you do your thing, and then the dentist may come in and just do a quick exam, kind of find out what kind of happened. That's considered his diagnosis and his dentist authorization. Okay, so that's what indirect would be. So that makes sense because they're there but not directly over your shoulder. They're just indirectly there on the premise. So everything that we do needs to have a dentist authorization, no matter what kind of supervision it is. Okay, so general supervision, you need to have their authorization, but the dentist is not on the premise. He's on vacation, asks his hygienist if she'd like to make some money and work. So you can go in and work without the dentist being there. All of your patients need to be contacted and say, do you mind the dentist not being here? Because some people, they're like, I can't wait to have my teeth cleaned because I want to ask the dentist about this one cavity. So they're like, I don't want to make 2 trips, so I'll come back when the dentist is there. And they may do it that way. Some will say, no, I never have anything wrong. If he's not there, I don't have to pay for the dentist exam, and I just want my teeth cleaned. And so they'll say, sure, I'll come. And so you can do that, but it can't be a brand new patient, and you can't have to give anesthesia, and you can't be needing nitrous because your dentist isn't there, but you can do everything else. So let's say unsupervised practice is allowed. So this is no supervision at all can be allowed in it's certain issues in Colorado, Connecticut, New Mexico, Minnesota, and Maine. Okay, so the practice of dental hygiene, abuse reporting. With children, they're vulnerable, dependent, or disabled adults, or also like your elderly or disabled are also connected in the abuse reporting. Patient records. Some states mandate maintenance of records statutorily. They require people to go through there on like every year or every so often and maintain those records. Some states enact separate laws covering this, how they do that. You need other provisions, professional liability insurance. Some states require the hygienist to have professional liability insurance. In most states, it's your option. I would do that, but in most states, it's your option. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation certification, your CPR, and self-referrals and kickbacks may be certain provisions. Due process, something that you need to know is if someone is served, we are entitled to receive notice and have an opportunity to be heard by law. So that's called a due process of law. They'll say, were you given due process of law? And you'll say, no, I didn't receive notice. I wasn't served. I'll see on TV how they'll run up to somebody and say, you are now served. Okay, that's giving them notice. And then you have an opportunity to be heard. They can't just decide this case without you being there. You get an opportunity to say your side of whatever is going on. That's called due process of law. So the ethical dilemma worksheets are very helpful. If you have a dilemma, talking with a trusted colleague would be something that would be good. You could apply some kind of ethical dilemma that you may have to a small group discussion before you decide to actually act on it. And dental hygiene, remember, is self-regulated health profession, obligated to be familiar though with statutory and regulatory provisions, and that you should, State Practice Act should be reviewed annually. I don't know many people, it's bad that it review this annually, usually like every couple years as the license is being renewed. You may want to look over it and make sure that nothing has changed or everything's the same, because just in this last, I think, year, in 2019, I think, Arkansas, which normally did not allow anybody to give or was it Alabama, Arkansas or Alabama, that did not allow anybody to give anesthesia, finally allowed their hygienists just in the last year or so to give anesthesia, but they can only give an infiltration. So I'm not sure what help that's going to be to a dentist, but they can at least give an infiltration. So it's little things like that that is a good thing for you to just kind of overlook it every year and kind of see if any new thing has arisen. A lot of times they'll have a section in the beginning that will talk about updates, and anything new that has come about will be in that update. Okay, so this is a summary and hopefully gives you some ideas of places to go to find out information about the states, because you will be needing to, I'll have you in groups, and you will be needing to choose 2 states in one of your presentations, and you will need to go over a list of things that I have listed out that you need to find, and you contrast and compare like 2 different states. So I'll go more into that on a separate Teams meeting, and we'll go over that. But I give 2 weeks for that to be due, and we'll go over that. All right, so that's it.